Hey there, cats and kitties. I am the Blues Man, Johnny Blues. And with this video, I want to talk about another favorite film of mine, that being, of course, Wreck-It Ralph. I just got done watching this again for the first time in a while, and I'd frankly forgotten just how much I love this particular film. I mean, being somebody who was a gamer very early on in life, from the early Atari to Nintendo, Sega Genesis, up to the PlayStation, PS2, all of that kind of stuff, going to arcades, this movie has a lot for anyone who's, grown up in that sort of environment. Gaming, cultural references all throughout, from basically Pac-Man, Cubert, there's a sort of passing reference to Final Fantasy VII, and a blink and you'll miss it, graffiti on the wall, Aerith Libs, it says, Metal Gear Solid with the sort of alarm system exclamation point sound effect, Sonic the Hedgehog, Street Fighter, on and on and on in this particular film. But this is also a movie that it's not just, made up of all these pop cultural and gaming references. It's actually a moving, engaging story with a lot of heart. And some twists and turns and such like that. I mean, it features an all-star cast, the likes of which John C. Reilly, Sarah Silverman, Jane Lynch, Jack McBrayer, Alan Tudyk, which was a pleasant surprise for me. Being a Firefly and Serenity fan, I frankly didn't know he was voicing this particular character in the film, which I'll get to in a little bit here. But also like Ed O'Neill, Lorraine Newman, Dennis Haysbert, just on and on and on. Very familiar faces and voices all throughout this particular film. And you're dealing with Wreck-It Ralph, the title character, as voiced by John C. Reilly, who is, for all intents and purposes, the bad guy in the game that he exists in. Fix-It Felix Jr., it's called. And that's also a character in the game that he is a part of. He's very much downtrodden and depressed about having to be the bad guy in this particular game. It's basically he destroys the apartment building of all these other gaming characters, and then Felix comes in and has to repair it and all stuff. And unfortunately, we find out that Ralph has to basically live off to the side of his little sort of in-game community in the garbage. They really don't care about him. They see him as being a bad guy, a villain. They're afraid of him. They treat him so horribly, and he's lonely, and he hates this life that he has to live. He's even taking part in these bad guys anonymous meetings where you see other villains in sort of gaming franchises, the Ghosts in one case from Pac-Man, Zangief from Street Fighter, as well as other characters from that game. And it's kind of funny, but it's also, it kind of tugs at your heartstrings a little bit, because he's really just living an unfulfilling life. He hates having to be so disdained and, people being sort of afraid of him and all this stuff. What he most wants is to be able to be treated like Felix is in this gaming environment. He's always awarded a medal after defeating Ralph and fixing up the building that Ralph has been destroying and everything like that. Ralph gets thrown off the rooftop into the mud. And so he basically sees that the 30th anniversary of his game is now taking effect, and there's this big party going on with Felix and the other inhabitants of that game, and he kind of crashes the party, and things just do not go well. It ends up with him challenging himself, as well as the characters who are afraid of him, who exist in this game with him, to the idea that even though he is a bad guy, he will one day achieve the winning of a heroic medal. And we basically see, much akin to like Toy Story, where the toys come to life, all of these video game characters are sentient, they're all alive, and they can actually cross from one game to another. It pieces together, basically, there's this first-person shooter new game on the block. It's sort of like an alien invasion kind of thing. He pieces together, if he goes inside that game, he might have an easier time getting a heroic medal. And he does this, and just havoc ensues. It's kind of like an entire snowball effect of things just going haywire. He ends up inadvertently getting involved in like this spaceship, which shoots him back out of the game and into a sort of Candyland-esque, racing game. This is where the bulk of the picture takes place, essentially. Vanellope's world. This is the character voiced by Sarah Silverman, just adorably so. Sarah Silverman by herself is hilarious and adorable, but then playing this character is that much more so. she is a glitched out character in this environment that is basically being persecuted and discriminated for that fact. They basically have this character, King Candy, who is the one voiced by Alan Tudyk from Firefly and Serenity, respectively. And I never would have guessed that he was the voice of this character because it's very Edwin Mad Hatter-esque for people who are familiar with the history of Disney and everything like that. Edwin was this comedian back in like the 20s and 30s, and there are some, snippets that you can find on YouTube where he had a live show back in, I think, the 50s maybe, and the Three Stooges were on that and everything. Just an absolutely hilarious guy. You see this guy cropping up in Mary Poppins. He voiced the Mad Hatter, and Alan Tudyk does a spot-on just representation of that sort of voice that I was almost like scratching my head. Did they somehow, dig up the body and regenerate Edwin to get this character's voice, King Candy? And this is a character, too, that, he's likable even though there's more to the game, things you don't necessarily expect. But essentially, you have Ralph having to team up with Vanellope, who is, as I say, this persecuted character for the fact that she glitches out and she could, air quotes, crash the game or what have you. There's fears of characters going turbo, and you're not quite sure what that means. And you get a backstory about how there was this character who became so self-obsessed with being the best racing game or gaming character in the arcade, he was forcibly, going into other games and ended up ruining them. All this kind of stuff, sending games packing, and there's this fear amongst the gaming characters of going turbo like that, especially when Ralph leaves his game. It's kind of, they're fearing that's the same kind of psychological thing that's going on. We're going to have our whole game destroyed. And of course, there are certain elements that play along that line where, basically the arcade owner marks the game out of order and all this stuff. And there's a sort of race against time for Ralph to be able to make Vanellope's dream of being this #1 racer in her racing game, even though they don't want her to compete because, again, they say the game might crash and there's more going on in that whole estimation. But they have to be able to, let her win her game as well as get back to their own games in time, because there are different characters. There's one from the first-person shooter Bug Invasion game who's chasing after Ralph because he had inadvertently brought bugs from that game into the Candyland-esque racing game. You have Fix-It Felix Jr. also trying to track down Ralph because his game is nothing without him, he finally comes to realize. And it's just a really trippy, awesome, fun, engaging film, as I say, with twists and turns you don't necessarily see coming, and all throughout which you also have these great pop culture and gaming references. And it's just a blast to watch this particular film. I hope we will be getting a sequel. I've seen, in search engines, people are wondering, people who really love this film as much as I do, really want to see a story continue on with these characters, and I'd be all for that. So I'd love to hear from you guys in the comments below if you've ever seen Wreck-It Ralph, what you thought of the film, if it's one that you really enjoy, or if it's one you haven't even seen yet. Let me know in the comments below, and whether or not you'll be checking it out based on this review. So, yeah, otherwise, it's pretty much all I have to say on this particular film. It was just balls to the wall, fantastic. And otherwise, that'll be it from me on this. So I hope this video finds you well, and I'll catch you all later. Peace.